certainly, I'm sure it certainly changes, making this something that's cut and dry. There will be an outcome that I guess we'll have to see, but I don't think it changes the global de-dollarization, the global drive away from the dollars. And if Russia is hampered in any way by their ability to hold up their end of the bargain with the BRICS, so be it. I still don't think it changes the ultimate move away from the U.S.
Well,
dollar.
look, Andy, every global reserve currency known to man has lost its place in the sun. You know, so it has been dethroned. It is sort of the natural cycle of events. And to your point about these countries sort of not really paying that much attention to the sanctions, we just had Yellen in South Africa speaking to President Cyril Ramaphosa saying, hey, you guys are kind of contravening the sanctions a little bit. You need to play nicely. But we don't know how much weight her word has if we're not seeing the U.S. willing to back it up with what, military, right? I mean, is that what it comes to? Why have people played along all this time? Was it because of the assumed military might of the United States?
I think that had a lot to do with it. And look, a lot of these countries a decade ago were in no position to do this. You know, when in 1974, when Kissinger signed this contract, you know, the Middle East was a poor area. They weren't enriched and they weren't developed the way that they are right now. And you could say the same thing about China. The progression that they've made as an industrialized nation is extraordinary. So I guess it's just, like you said, to your point, it's the time. You go back to the 1400s, almost every currency had between an 80 and 100-year lifespan. We're already, you know, we're on the outskirts of that, living on borrowed time, you could argue, from an historical perspective. So maybe we've just run the course of our currency.
Andy, who's on Team Dollar? Who would prefer the dollar other than the United States? Although you argue that this may be a way to reset everything, and we'll get back to that. But who would prefer for the dollar to maintain its status?
I suppose those countries that are part of the Western Alliance: Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, Japan. And I don't know if they really do want it to continue. I don't know who is on Team Dollar. I guess I haven't thought that far out, to be quite honestly. I haven't thought about it that way. I guess all I'm looking at is mathematics. And when you see such a massive shift of human population coalescing against the dollar, and it's very obvious to see when you see shifts away from accepting the dollar for oil by countries already, and admissions by Saudi Arabia to look to other currencies, I think you have to take a real hard look at what happens if all of a sudden the world doesn't need to own dollars to buy oil.
And it's not just oil, because we're seeing a move away from U.S. treasuries globally. Well, certainly from China,
of course.
Right?
Not just China, Saudi Arabia, all of these countries. Why would anyone buy our treasuries earning 3% with inflation double that by metrics that arguably are wrong? You know, I don't know if you've ever had John Williams with Shadow Stats on your show, but you know, he'll show you numbers that the way the inflation was calculated prior to 1980, when they changed the numbers, and he would say inflation's at 15% right now. But even using 7% inflation with a 3.5% yield on the 10-year Treasury, you're guaranteed a real return of negative 3.5% compounding over 10 years. Why would anyone want to do that? And so you're right, it's not just the dollar market, it is the Treasury market. And we are incentivizing, by the underperformance and the mismanagement of the dollar and what's happened to the yields on the Treasuries, for other people or for these countries to find other ways.
And I guess, you know, they're looking at the U.S. with this unprecedented fiscal and monetary stimulus printing away and saying, well, now our debts are larger. The U.S. is just devaluing our reserves. So I can understand how the sentiment against the dollar would be building up in this scenario. So let's assume this does play out and we do have a split in the monetary system, and the dollar loses its value, and perhaps this BRICS reserve currency, which is digital, which is backed by commodities, comes into play and becomes a leading player on the global stage. Walk us through what happens to the dollar, and for those holding dollars back home.
Yeah, I think at that point, you know, you have a wave of dollar selling. Every country on the planet, nearly 85% of all oil sales have been in dollars for, I don't know, the last 50 years, if not more. All of these countries, it's the foundation of their currencies. And if all of a sudden the dollar starts to tank, it'll be a tsunami of selling, sell, 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 in order to not be crushed by the wave of selling. And I think when that happens, and you have all of the dollars hitting the shores here, you have that inflationary spike in interest rates. It has to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. Interest rates would have to spike. And when I started in this industry, stocks and bonds were inversely correlated to one another. It was called risk on and risk off. And when you realize that they are now positively correlated to one another because interest rates have been driven so low, a spike in interest rates cripples both the bond and the stock market and, of course, the real estate market. The pillars of wealth in the United States center around stocks, bonds, and real estate. If the dollar gets dumped globally, and there's way more dollars outside the U.S. than there are domestically, if all of a sudden they get dumped globally because you don't have to hold them to buy oil anymore, and they hit our shore, spiking interest rates, you see a collapse simultaneously in all three pillars of wealth, including the dollar.
On this idea of oil, though, there has been an attempted shift away from oil towards solar, towards natural gas, towards various other forms of clean energy, nuclear even perhaps. So is it that relevant what
No.
oil is priced in?
No, because
if the shift is away from oil?
No, because this is the whole reason that OPEC and Saudi Arabia want to leave us. Why would they want to not only receive our depreciating dollars and treasuries and sell us their oil when we're telling them in 30 years we're going to be completely green? So instead they're focusing their energy on what amounts to north of 80% of human population who is not going green and who is not challenging their way of life. And so I think it is actually the catalyst by which Saudi Arabia makes this shift. Once they have their alliances and they feel safe, I think they'll make that switch, and it will happen quickly. I think when that switch flips, it happens really quickly. But no, I think in fact we're making a mistake by doing that. I think we're making a very big mistake by making the admission to the Saudis that we want to go green. We're ruining their way of life, is the way they're looking at it. So why would they want to do any special favors for us? And this is why they came out and said to Xi Jinping that you are our most important trade partner in oil today and for the next 50 years. That's a big deal because we've been their biggest trade partner for the last 50 years. So I think really it is the key point, only in reverse. So,
Okay.
yeah, it matters, but it matters more for them than it does for us.
Well, because you could say that developing countries have been put off by this idea. You guys have used carbon fossil fuels to grow your economies. Now that we're trying to do the same, you're telling us no, we can't do that and hampering our growth.
And that's why you see 152 countries on the Belt Road Initiative.
Yeah.
And these are all the developing nations. And that's exactly right. And this is this grouping of humanity that I think, and that's why I say the word hypocrisy. This is not my word. It's just my perception of the way that they would view us by making these declarations.
What about other commodities that are not oil that you would still need to use dollars to buy? Is that where the split then just comes in?
Well, I mean, you could argue you have to, as the dollar is the world reserve currency, all of these commodities come into play. And it's interesting, the president of one of the Asian countries, and it skips me right now, recently came out and said that these countries, because most of the rare earth metals are found in Eurasia, should institute a OPEC-style cartel for rare earth metals. You know, we're going green, yet most of what we need to make batteries are found in the Eurasian continent. Maybe you have to use dollars to convert to the new currency to buy rare earth metals. I don't think we've thought this through very well, and so I don't know if the dollar loses its reserve status, who's going to want to sell their commodities for dollars? First, you'll have to convert to whatever it is they want to accept.
All right, and as you said, you're joining the dots, data points that seem to be making sense in this narrative that seems to be unfolding. What would be a projected timeline?
You know, I don't know. I think the timing is the hard part, but I will say this. When I started talking about this 3 years ago, it was spinning slowly, and you can see the rapid ascension and the progression of these alliances being made. And just in the last few weeks, we see Saudi Arabia make that admission about China being their most important trade partner. And just last week, the admission that they're willing to accept other currencies for oil. it seems to be accelerating, and since the weaponization of the dollar in 2022, it seems to be spinning much, much faster. I don't know when the switch flips, but sooner than we probably think.
Let's now connect the two parts of de-dollarization and the Great Reset, which is an agenda of the World Economic Forum, best crystallized by the line, "You shall owe nothing and be happy," and their timeline, which of course is 2030. So make the connection for us between de-dollarization and the Great Reset, and also explaining further what the Great Reset is.
Well, that's just what I said. You have asset prices stratospherically high, where price discovery has become impossible because of the distortions in the money supply and in interest rates. And it's created environments where corporations can buy back their shares, where hedge funds can borrow money and plow it into the markets and make huge returns on and huge bonuses, but have created distortions in asset prices. So if we see that moment, and when I tried to factor in what Klaus Schwab said and the possibility of it happening, and it all centers around the weaponization of the dollar wasn't intended. Did they know that by making this unilateral move that it would create a backlash and have a villain to point to, OPEC and Russia and China, and they did it, we didn't, they did it to us, and in that environment where asset prices are very high and the dollar is forsaken, creating that environment of spiked interest rates and an inflationary tsunami of dollars hitting our shore, you see everything collapse. That's when they would come in and roll out their new CBDC. We know that they're already doing it. They're already creating it. The Bank of International Settlements said every country has to have it by 2025. This gives them cover to roll it in. If you look at the Fed, the number 2 person at the Fed is Lael Brainerd. In fact, I thought she was going to actually win the spot for the Fed instead of Powell. They reappointed him, but they made her number 2. She's a modern monetary theorist. She wants to get rid of the commercial banks. She wants to do monetary policy directly to your iPhone. And so it would fit perfectly that this would happen sometime in the next few years anyway, where she could come in and administer a central bank digital currency and from the ashes of what would be a new system. And maybe they come out and issue a gold-backed CBDC. Who knows? The point of it is that if you wanted to create a reset, and I couldn't think of any other way that they could do it, because look, if Powell wanted to create a reset himself, all he would have had to do is jacked up the reserve requirements of the banks and raise interest rates to 20%, just like Paul Volcker did. Bang, it's over, just like that. Instead, they pussyfoot around with 1/4.5 point interest rates that still render the return on the 10-year Treasury negative. They're not doing anything to fix inflation. So if they really wanted to reset the system, jack up asset prices, and then incentivize the world to find an alternative, weaponize the dollar, and it's done for you with a villain to point to. That's why I put the dots together. Not saying it's going to happen, just simply saying, what's that, Occam's razor? You put everything together, and maybe the most plausible, logical explanation is the right one. I hope I'm wrong. My youngest is 15 years old, and I don't want to be right, but I have a feeling, unfortunately, that I am.
Well, on the Occam's razor, you could say that the simplest explanation is just sheer incompetence. Never attribute to malice what can be ascribed to stupidity.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Either they're really, really stupid or they're nefarious.
Yeah. So let's go back to the nefarious angle. Because you keep on saying they. Who is the they here?
Who's behind the World Economic Forum? The Federal Reserve, they have to understand that we've dug ourselves into a hole that we can never dig ourselves out of. A trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. How do you dig yourself out of 100+ trillion in debt as interest rates rise? You don't. You can't. And so they, being the people that realize the mathematics have gotten too big, and we have squeezed as much utility out of a currency, a dying currency, and a Keynesian system as we humanly possibly can. So either we default or inflate. I guess that's really the only 2 options.
Or, as you suggest, burn the whole thing down.
Yes.
And start over with the CBDC.
Take the monopoly board and throw it up in the air and start over, new game. And that is the conclusion that I came up with only by connecting these dots and saying, geez.
Why would people go along with it? Why would people that have a lot at stake in the current monetary system not push back on this? The
would-
billionaires of the
I
world,
would
for
argue,
example.
why do you see record withdrawals off the COMEX and the LBMA, where the LBMA is losing not only its base metals but all its precious metals, where the COMEX is at the lowest level of inventory in terms of what they have in the registered category, maybe ever close to it, but a massive drawdown. Why are we seeing the central banks buy more gold than at any time in the last 55 years? The people who are closest to the information and have the most money, they're making an exodus quietly. Why do we see uh, uh, India import 400 million ounces of silver and the mainstream isn't talking about it? These countries not only are and players, wealthy family offices, sovereign wealth funds, they're not just accumulating the metal, they're withdrawing it off of the exchanges.
Silver and gold.
Yes, and where it loses a good deal of its industrial liquidity. If you want to have metal as an investment, you leave it in the COMEX warehouses because you have industrial liquidity. Where Elon Musk says, I'll pay $50 premium for every ounce of silver people want to sell. No, this stuff is being shipped outside the exchanges. It's a very big deal. So to your point, just like in 1933 when gold was confiscated, so much of it, the insiders shipped their gold to the safe deposit boxes by steamship of Switzerland before FDR confiscated gold. Maybe these people who are draining the exchanges in a precipitous way for the last 3 years are front running what is coming. And so most people in this country, 60% of them or so, are living paycheck to paycheck. They can't even write out a check for $5,000. So they'll be happy to be given stimulus and handouts attached to a new central bank digital currency.
And of course, with the central bank digital currency, which is programmable,
Yes.
you just click and everybody automatically gets what they need.
That's right.
So break down the relationship between the CBDCs. Well, firstly, is it one CBDC representing the BRICS, backed by commodities? And then how do the other countries come in with their versions of CBDCs?
So I think ultimately it will be one. A lot of the countries.
One universal.
Yes, for the CBDC, but right now they're all creating their own. And the Chinese built something called the M Bridge, as in Mary, M Bridge, which is a cross-border payment system for central bank digital currencies. And they did this with United Arab Emirates and one other company, maybe Singapore. I forgot the third country, but it's irrelevant. The point is that this allows cross-border payments, sidestepping the SWIFT system in central bank digital currencies. That's the bridge, if you will, to a common currency. But they are all de-dollarizing. They are all moving away from the dollar as sole settlement. Turkey just created their own. Turkey also imported more gold than any country in the world last year. And they just applied for BRICS. So they're all doing it little by little by little. They asked Ernest Hemingway, I believe, how'd you go broke? Little by little by little, then all at once. And I think that's what's happening.
Slowly, then suddenly.
It's a chess game, and they're moving the pieces, and then they say checkmate. But not until they're all in position. So to your point earlier, question, timing, don't know, but watch how the chess pieces keep.
So how does gold play into this role? If you're backed by commodities, you eliminate the option of printing, which takes away a lot of power for the central banks themselves,
Absolutely.
as they've been able to do for their own countries. But I get that they would need to do this to have legitimacy on the global stage. So they would have to, I guess, sacrifice the ability to print money in order to be seen legitimate on the world
I
stage.
think they would do it in two ways. They would not allow it to be convertible, because de Gaulle from France proved that convertible currencies convert, and they would fractionalize it. Maybe 20% of every new BRICS currency is pegged to gold or to a commodity that is shown, the veracity and the immutability of which is shown on their distributed ledger. So I don't think it would be a one-to-one pegging. That would still give them the latitude to enact monetary policy. But I think gold would be the anchor. Instead of being able to let them print unabated, it would allow them at least to run monetary policy with some tether to prudence.
So let's assume we've listened to you and we've bought some gold ourselves. Let's assume it's 2030, which is the timeline of the World Economic Forum, which is only 7 years away.
Right.
And we've got central bank digital currencies, which to me are very terrifying because every single transaction can be seen by the government every single time you spend, pay for something, zero privacy, zero anonymity, and perhaps more concerningly, the ability to program when and what you can spend on. But let's assume we're there, but I've listened to Andy and I've bought some gold and I have my gold bars and gold coins and silver coins safely hidden away. How would I practically be able to use that to my benefit in this world?
Because I think it allows you safety when the system collapses. So, look, if a CBDC rolls out and we all have no choice but to use it, either you use it or you're in a black market. But what it does is it gives you options when others have none. And, that's why guys like Jim Rickards and Jim Sinclair say gold will reach crazy levels, 10,000 an ounce, because it'll be pegged to a new system. So not only does it allow you not just to survive, maybe even thrive. Maybe this is why the biggest money in the world is drawing down the supplies of all of these exchanges before it becomes obvious that's their life raft. But it'll be options, and what? Maybe you have to sell it and go into the new CBDC when you decide to do it. We have to play within the game that the rules that are afforded to us. But I think it gives you options when others have none.
So it would allow me to preserve my
Yes.
wealth,
Yes.
and then I would need to convert it, I suppose, into CBDCs in order to function.
Correct, or
in the
barter,
system.
I guess, in theory, but
Or perhaps have a side system where people are
Yes.
dealing
well,
with.
you never know. I guess it depends how the CBDC goes over.
Where do you see something like Bitcoin play into this? Because we've had people who are saying the same narrative, but instead of gold, they have Bitcoin as the answer.
I'm not a Bitcoin basher, but I look at gold as it's lived through 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, and every pandemic, and it's still immutable wealth. What is the only asset every central bank owns? Gold. And I think that there are some that own Bitcoin,
Yeah.
not all of them.
Well, on that point, I mean, Canada, correct me if I'm wrong, where we currently are, has sold off the majority of its
Stupid.
gold.
And then so did the Bank of England. Gordon
I mean,
Brown
Canada
sold most
has
of their gold
practically
at
no
$2.50.
gold.
Stupid. Well, maybe they think it's the gold in the ground. Maybe at that point they nationalize it. I don't know. It makes zero sense. It really does. But, again, that was a trend that was happening for quite some time. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they just bought some gold for the first time. Not mistaken, they just bought some in 2022. Now, I'm not positive on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Point of it is that I think there will come a realization that interest-bearing assets in this environment isn't the most important thing, and you would think a country like Canada would wise up. They certainly have a lot of it in the ground, some of the most in the world. So maybe that will be their answer to this: is we nationalize the mines and don't allow any of it to leave the country. Don't know.
Right.
But it's a good point.
Yeah, it's
You bring up a lot of good points.
Thank you. It's a scary world you're painting here, Andy. Again, is there a mastermind? Is this orchestrated by someone, or is this just how things develop and certain players are positioning themselves to take advantage of it?
Are there ever coincidences? I don't know. I would like the scariest part of it all, Michelle, is there a mastermind behind it? If it is, it makes it much more frightening. Because it is orchestrated, it is thought out, it is planned out, and maybe it's a combination of both. Maybe it's circumstances that have come into play that are now being taken advantage of to paint the narrative or a picture that they want. And who's they? I don't know. They are the ones that are pulling the strings. The Federal Reserve, the big money, the World Economic Forum. Maybe they have more clout and more pull than we think. But anyways, I think it might be a combination of both. If I had to really guess, I would say that this is thought out. And it all comes down to the fact that if you don't see the consequences of weaponizing the world reserve currency on a world stage, when 85% of the world is still trading with Russia, then either you're really stupid or you're really, you see what you're doing and you know the outcome.
You're either stupid or arrogant or in on it.
Right.
So with that, is there anything that derails this? Is there anything that happens, anything at all, even if this war escalating into a nuclear
that
crisis?
would certainly
I mean,
do
what
it.
what derails this track from happening?
maybe the US comes out and beats the bricks to the punch and issues a gold-backed CBDC right away and shows here's all the gold that we said that we had, the 8,300 metric tons that hasn't been audited since 1956, and here it is. And we now connected it to a central bank digital ledger for everyone to see, and here's our new gold-backed currency. And maybe it allows us to pull ourselves up from our bootstraps, and we don't see the world dumping dollars. Maybe. I mean, that certainly would be a step in the right direction. Because I think there comes a time where, where you just keep drinking the watered down milk, and pretty soon it's not milk anymore. And I think we're at that point. So to me, that would be the one place that we could
So
go.
the U.S. gets ahead of the curve, realizes it needs to do a reset anyway.
Right.
Wipes the slate clean, but comes out with, hey, we have our own CBDC, digital dollar, Fed coin, backed by gold. So use this for the new system, but let's just forget about all that debt.
In conjunction with the International Monetary Fund.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is 150 countries from around the world who all join on board.
But what I'm hearing that either way is that a CBDC, digital money, programmable,
There's
on
no
the
question.
blockchain is inevitable.
And I think it's less to do with the privacy aspect, or certainly the government likes that, and more to do with monetary policy, the way money is created right now by being lent into existence by a commercial bank system that doesn't want to lend money into this economy, where $2 trillion is in the overnight repo market, where the FDIC Systemic Resolution Board publicly in November has a video that's now out saying that, maybe we shouldn't tell the country that there's going to be a run on the banks because of the unintended consequences. And maybe we don't want the public to know that they have more confidence in the banking system than the people in this room do. So when you see all of these things coming together, you have to wonder, where does it lead? I don't know, Michelle, and I don't profess to be a soothsayer or a prophet, just simply looking at all the pieces and saying, if I were over there and I had something as precious as oil, I don't think I'd want to sell it for dollars and treasuries any longer.
On the FDIC comment, we had Lynette Zhang on, who broke down how Dodd-Frank actually allows for bail-ins where the banks can take the money of depositors and bail themselves out, and that's legal, that's there, and that was that meeting that you were talking about, that they just don't want to tell people, even though it's there, people just need to pay attention and watch.
Absolutely.
Well, Andy, you've certainly been paying attention. So what is the recourse of action for an individual?
Do what the big money is doing. Remove counterparty risk and de-dollarize. Mitigate your exposure to the dollar. Look, my friend Rick Rule says it best. If you're not a contrarian, you're going to be a victim. I think this is a time to embrace that and to truly diversify outside the dollar. When people talk about a diversified portfolio, all of it comes back to the dollar. And I think having something outside the system, looking what the biggest money in the world is doing, not just big money, but sophisticated. Because when you're pulling that much money off of COMEX and the LBMA, you're sophisticated too. Follow what they're doing, and I think that's the best thing you can do.
And that is what?
Take possession of metal. Buy gold and silver. Take possession of it. Look at it as wealth. It's not an investment. It's wealth. And I think if you own enough of it, you'll be wealthy. But I tell people to own metals because it is wealth outside the system. And outside a system that may be coming to its end stages, and that's really, I think, all you can do, because if interest rates do spike the way that I think, there will be very few places. In fact, as my mentor in many respects, Richard Russell, said, in a very bad bear market, he or she who loses least wins. And I think that's what this is all about, losing least, putting yourself in a position to at least retain what we've worked so hard to accumulate all these years.
Well, Andy, I hope you're wrong.
So do I. So do I.
It's been enlightening, but I certainly hope you're wrong.
So I appreciate your pushback. You asked some great questions and raised some great points that I'll give a lot of thought to, and they're all valid, but I hope I'm wrong too. I really do. Unfortunately, I think it's growing a little bit more and more and more like some of what I'm saying, if not all,
Right.
has a chance of happening.
I'm not saying I think you're wrong.
Reducing our testosterone and turning us into limp-neutered men. The good news is, though, you'll soon be able to buy babies from factories. Welcome to planet Earth, everyone! Hey, do you remember during the pandemic when they said that the technology used for vaccine passports would never be normalised and utilised in ordinary situations and become part of a social credit score system where everyone would have a digital ID and CBDCs would become normalised? Well, guess what? That was a lie. It is happening. Hello there, you 6 billion awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage towards truth and freedom. The mainstream media are not your friends. They want you dumb, dead, and in chains. Look around you. Open your eyes. You don't need me to tell you that. Turn on your TV. Look at what they're telling you. They're telling you that you need to give up your power and allow power to be continually centralised. They're trying to turn us against one another continually. We have a spiritual challenge on our hands as well as a political one. It can be handled in our own hearts, but it also has to be handled out in the world, in the streets also. In this incarnation, what we are addressing is the introduction of digital IDs and central banking digital currencies. Both things that, I don't know, needn't necessarily be awful, but you can bet your arse they will be. We'll get into this in more detail. Let's go. Last month, The Times reported that governments globally are on the precipice of major adoption of digital ID. The European Union is preparing for the 2024 release of its digital ID wallet, which would enable EU residents to store digital identity credentials such as national ID, driving licence and bank account details. Let's have a look at them announcing this plan to turn us all into data and manageable, little, humorless, faceless, libidoless drones.
Und aus diesem Grund wird die Kommission demnächst eine sichere europäische digitale Identität vorschlagen. Eine, der wir vertrauen und die Bürgerinnen und Bürger überall in Europa nutzen können,
You can do anything, as long as we permit it, as long as there's not some lockdown, as long as you've never thought or believed anything that we don't agree with. So technology is of course not necessarily bad, it's simply a tool. What we're concerned about is the ongoing centralisation of data and the ability of unelected bodies like the European Union or various international organisations that implement controls. We've seen this happen in the last couple of years, having the ability to correlate data and through this concrescence of national power and global data create states that are beneficial to their agenda. We've seen it already in the last couple of years. We've seen it piloted. Don't have to be a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist in spite of what you might read, to understand that certain sets of interests have benefited from various crises over the last couple of years and perhaps for a lot longer than that. The pandemic was hugely profitable to the wealthiest people in the world. The data is available for that. Big tech benefited, governments benefited through their ability to regulate, the pharmaceutical industry benefited. If it's a conspiracy theory, you shouldn't be able to call up data and demonstrate that it's 100% true. So do you think this technology that will be in the same hands, the same sets of interests, is going to be ultimately beneficial to you for convenience, for safety, the two cudgels that are used to bludgeon you into compliance? Do you think that this is going to mean that we're so safe and everything's so convenient that it's barely worth getting up out of bed? Why don't you just stick a tube down my neck, fill me full of glucose and I'll wait for the grave?
alles zu tun. Vom Steuerzahlen bis zum Fahrradmieten.
There you are, as usual, it's presented as convenient and amenable. And there's no doubt that having like a sort of a phone that can do all sorts of fancy stuff and being able to get into venues and all those things, they are convenient to be able to pay for travel. And all of these things are convenient. But what if the wind changes? What if there are a new set of circumstances? What if there are new climate curfews, new virus lockdowns, a new government altogether that just simply decides to change things? Once you start implementing this technology, you have to have the kind of naive faith and trust that like either a lamb or an idiot would place into organisations and institutions that have not been behaving in a particularly benevolent fashion over the last few years. That's just my view. Let me know your view in the chat. The EU has picked its partners in developing the bloc's controversial digital ID wallet, and one of them is the same company that previously worked to develop the UK's official COVID pass and tracing app, Luxembourg-based net company Intrasoft. Intrasoft. It's all interwoven and it's all nice and soft. Nothing to worry about there. Every government that introduced the vaccine certification vowed that no personal information will be held beyond its necessity. That's what you would say. But governments were far from unanimous on how long and by whom our intimate information will be held owned or overseen. Along with IBM, the designer, state bureaucrats were exploring how the platform could be retrofitted to verify other types of records and credentials, according to Vox. Once biodata are collected and filed, cautioned Hamid Khan of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, there's no delete button. In a sense, does this remind you of when Edward Snowden's revelations were made, that we just didn't have an understanding of the degree to which we could be tracked, how much of our data was being captured, who had access to it? Does this not make you think also of the recent revelations of the amount of CIA and FBI involvement in platforms like Twitter and other platforms also, that there's just a interconnected, symbiotic relationship between big tech platforms and the government, and that there's a shared agenda to accrue information, because whether it's commercially or in order to implement state power, the acquisition of data is extremely powerful. Ultimately, they believe that we are data, that we're nothing more than information, that we can be observed and tracked, and obviously, once it gets to CBDCs, centralised currencies, they're digital, controlled. The more ability to exert power they have, the more power they actually have. Not long ago, in order to counter a genuine radical movement of ordinary people, they would have to have the army on the streets. Now people can just be shut down with a button. Your ability to transact could be shut down easily and simply. I don't have that much trust in anyone in the world, let alone the organisations that we're granting it to. When biometric data, bodily attributes digitised, are married to surveillance technology, both the potential for profit and the ambitions of the techno-futurists inflate without limit. The British tech firm Onfido envisions a seamless EU-wide identity verification, or IDV system, for online gambling, telemedicine, car rentals, electronic voting and more. In 2020, Onfido called its immunity passport in development the linchpin of a new normality in a post-COVID-19 society. As is often the case, these matters are not only conspiratorial, not only are they not conjecture, the very organisations that are involved are explicitly telling you what the plan is. They're overtly saying, this is what we're going to do. And then if you counter with a question like, couldn't that be misused under certain circumstances, even your inquiry is regarded as a kind of hysteria. But how can it be hysterical if you've been alive for the last couple of years? If you're witnessing the advancing censorship on social media platforms and in mainstream media, the growing power and wealth of these big tech organisations, the inability to enact meaningful change in the political space. It's a simple observation of fact at this point. This year, the company's chief privacy officer told Biometric Update that proven immunity to the virus de jure might become a basic permission attribute. A Swedish company has introduced a vaccine certification microchip that can be implanted under the skin. This is one of those times where you can just step back and look at all of the various nodes of progression and how they might coalesce to create digital tyranny. Meanwhile, in India, India's Income Tax Administration has warned citizens that they should link their permanent account numbers, or PANs, to their Aadhaar biometric identification numbers before April the 1st, 2023, or risk their PAN becoming non-operational. So there we are. There's an example of how it might be used, already happening. So it's not even a projection, it's an observation of what's happening presently. And of course, you'll be very familiar with the example of the Canadian truckers and people that donated having their bank accounts frozen. So already this technology is used, we're just discussing how it might be used, and therefore all we're discussing is, do you trust the institutions in power, whether they're governmental or corporate? Do you trust them? Let me know in the chat, let me know in the comments if the ability to exert this amount of control is something that you want to offer them. In India, PAN is required to perform multiple financial activities like creating bank accounts, depositing money, trading stocks, and buying or selling real estate. Throughout history, marginal communities that exist outside of the system have been condemned. Even in countries like mine, Britain, people that are travellers are regarded with suspicion, cynicism, and often outright racism because they simply live outside of our models of taxation and finance. They've just gone, hey, what if we could just live differently? And that's regarded as, how dare you try and live differently? But actually, why shouldn't you live differently? If you want to go and live in the woods, if you want to travel around, if you want to be free, if you want to harmonise with nature, who has the monopoly on what is right? Through identity politics, people are able now to discuss, hey, I feel like this, I want to be spoken to in that way. Fantastic, that's cool. You start saying, I want to opt out of the financial system, please. Good luck with those pronouns. So, this brings us to central banking digital currencies. Governments and financial institutions are increasingly warming to the idea of introducing central bank digital currencies. I like this idea that we could switch off the money tap. In April 2021, Rishi Sunak launched a task force on Bank of England digital currency. With the decline in the use of cash, which has been managed, and the increased prominence of cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin, there has been heightened interest among policymakers about the viability of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. Now, of course, Bitcoin was widely condemned and damned in public spaces because I imagine they observed it was something they couldn't control. Hold on, what if we had our own one that we could control? Oh no, that would be alright. Well, but what about all of the ecological stuff and all them other things you said? No, that don't matter now. Let's have a look at Rishi Sunak, Boulders Brass, WEF, Goldman Sachs, leader of our country if you're in the UK, telling us what we've got to look forward to.
Today, I'm proud to say that under the UK's presidency,
He's always in that mood, Rishi Sunak. I've never seen him not in that mood. Whether he's calling up Zelensky on the phone with old Trudy Trudeau, or announcing that he's going to end our relationship with China. Doesn't matter. Good news, bad news. Sorry that I was at those parties all the while you were locked up during lockdown. That's the mood he's in. Hello. Just like his smiling puppet, which is weird because he's an autonomous being who was democratically elected. Oh no, he wasn't democratically elected.
the group of the world's 7 most advanced economies, the G7, is launching a set of public policy principles for retail central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Central bank digital currencies could be a digital version of money,
You idiot.
a bit like a digital banknote that could be used alongside physical notes and coins.
For a while, till we stop banknotes and coins, and then we can control you even more.
Unlike most of the digital money people use daily today, it would be issued directly by a central bank, like the Bank of England in the UK.
It's all fine. It's all gonna be fine.
And governments and central banks across the world are working together,
Sort of like they're coordinated or conspiring to do it.
looking into what having a digital currency might mean in practice.
I've got an idea what it might mean in practice.
This includes issues that people care about, such as ensuring users' money would be safe and secure,
It's gotta be safe. It's gotta be secure.
would be energy efficient,
Oh, it's gotta be. Oh, but thank God. I mean, I was worried, like, the environment.
and available to everyone.
Yeah, it's gotta be everyone, like the poor, the desperate, the maligned, the outsiders, and people, for example, that virulently oppose your centralised systems. They shouldn't be excluded either.
A potential CBDC could offer businesses and consumers new ways to pay in the future.
Businesses and consumers. And what's outside of that? Nothing.
It's all part of the wider story of digital innovation that has delivered benefits to millions around the world and in the UK.
Woohoo! Benefits! Benefits! What if you're on benefits? Then you're fucked. In 2021, the Bank of England called on ministers to decide whether a central banking digital currency should be programmable, ultimately giving the issuer control over how it is spent by the recipient. Tom Mutton, a director at the Bank of England, said there could be some socially beneficial outcomes from that, preventing activity which is seen to be socially harmful in some way. Depending on the mood of the day, we could just shut down any dissidents or anyone who argues or we don't like the look of. You could think of giving your children pocket money but programming the money so that it couldn't be used for sweets. Have you noticed how they talk to us like we're idiot children continually, whether it's Rishi Sunak's kindly blank stare or the metaphors and analogies that they use to help us understand how the relentless advance of a centralised new world order will be sort of beneficial for us? You're like some children, okay, and you want some sweets, I suppose. Well, yeah, 'cause I'm a child, I don't want anything else. Well, you can't have no fucking sweets. Or, for example, freedom, or the right to dissent, or to believe what you want to believe, or live a lifestyle that we haven't sanctioned. All of that, beep, no sherbet for you, sonny boy. There is a whole range of things that money could do, programmable money, which we cannot do with the current technology. Yeah, once money's out there, people can do whatever they like, almost as if they're free. But once it's programmable money, they can do what we like, almost as if they're not free. And it's as simple as that. In spite of condemning China when it's convenient, many of our so-called democracies openly admire China and emulate them when possible. So what's going on over there? China is exploring expiration dates with its upcoming digital yuan, or DCEP, which means the currency will expire if not used in a certain time frame. So I guess they can switch off your money if you don't use it how they want you to. Let's have a look.
China is exploring expiration dates with its upcoming digital yuan, or DCEP, which means the currency will expire if not used in a certain time frame. The digital yuan is programmable to the point that the currency can be made to expire, thus forcing consumers to use it up by a certain date.
Forcing consumers. Now, I'm not an economist, so I don't know whether or not having currency expire and therefore having a greater turnover expenditure is good within a particular state capitalist or state communist model. I'm not qualified to say. But once the technology exists to sort of shut down, devalue or prevent money from being spent, it's pretty easy to see how that same technology might be used to control undesirable activity or undesirable people. And with more and more protest laws being introduced and more censorship laws and more control of what they they call misinformation and disinformation, if you add to that the ability to control currency, it's pretty easy to see how social credit score type systems, control of currency, could lead to a situation where you're essentially in an open prison, where you're essentially a slave, where you will have freedom, but that freedom is so prescriptive that it's not really freedom at all, is it? Once they can observe your health data, your financial habits, your spending habits, your medical situation, censor you to within an inch of your life and shut off your finances at the push of a button, what kind of freedom is really left? Let me know in the chat, let me know in the comments.
If domestic consumption can be tightly controlled, then it's a way to not just increase the volume of consumption but to control the variance of demand for the goods China produces.
Even though this is rather a nice presentation, just notice the words like force and tightly control. That's what it comes down to. When this is presented to you, it will be as convenient and safe and preventing fraud and fighting crime, and you'll be an inch taller and it's going to be great on your wedding day and all sorts of stuff. But in effect, they don't do things unless it gives them more power or it gives their corporate partners more ability to profit. Those are the only motivations you will ever see play out. Just look at any news story in the world, basically, and you can see that playing out. That's why I'm always suspicious when they say, this is because human life is sacred, or because we want to protect this marginalised group. You think, that doesn't seem to be how you behave generally, so why are you doing it this time? Because there's money in it.
The digital yuan permits a new method for surveilling the population.
Also good. It's good that you can surveil them, their spending habits, and stop them spending if they're naughty.
Creating new data which can be tracked by authorities.
I mean, what about this is good news for you and your family? Creating new data that can be tracked by authorities. Whichever way you look at it, it's less power for you, more power for them, ultimately more profit for organisations that are already benefiting hugely from the advance of technology. The problem is, of course, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, technology is not, of course, bad. It's wonderful and incredible and given us miraculous results because of the ingenuity of the people that have worked on this stuff. And with the right ideology behind it, we could be creating a sort of utopia here on Earth where people work less, where we have fairer, more equal societies with less conflict, where people could live traditional or progressive lifestyles depending on their preferences, and that not every single decision that was made was used to advance the interests of centralised authority. But looking at today's presentation, it's pretty clear that whether it's social credit scoring or digital IDs or CBDCs, ultimately in the wrong hands this will diminish your power and increase their power. But that's just what I think. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these, turn on the notifications